Jeff, we're rolling. I said action.
I see you found our graphics cards, and they're only 50% above retail.
50%? That wasn't the deal!
I have altered the deal. Pray I don't alter it further.
Buying a graphics card shouldn't cost you an arm and a leg, and with Jawa, it doesn't. You see, Jawa is a marketplace for buying and selling PC parts, and it's aimed at gamers and enthusiasts who are sick of scalpers and markups. When you sell with Jawa, you can also save hundreds of dollars versus other sites, as Jawa has the lowest fees in the business. Visit jawa.gg by following our affiliate link down in the video description, and check out their featured listings, find a seller you can trust, and get everything you need for your new PC today. That's jawa.gg, and again, a huge thanks to them for sponsoring today's video. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. The full, uninhibited handheld gaming experience is something of a unicorn that I've been chasing for quite some time. And while devices like the Switch dominate the mobile gaming market, it's no replacement for my gaming desktop PC or my PC games library. If you've been watching me for some time, you may have seen my review of the GPD Win 3, and the biggest question I had before using it was, will it deliver AAA gaming performance on my AAA games? And surprisingly, it managed to deliver with reasonably acceptable trade-offs in graphics. If you want a full rundown on the GPD Win 3, you can check out my review of that right up here. But today, in pursuit of my white whale, I have in front of me, or next to me more accurately, the Ayaneo Next. It's their latest attempt at powerful PC performance in a pint-sized portable package. And screw you, Rhett, for putting that in the script. Now, Ayaneo did send this out for my review, but like all reviews on this channel, no money changed hands. Ayaneo gets no input over the content of this video, nor will they see the video before it goes live on YouTube. I do get to keep this device, however, it is a pre-production model, so there might be a couple of revisions before this goes into final production. As far as specs, the Ayaneo Next may be the most powerful portable on the market, boasting an AMD Ryzen 7 5800U APU based on the Zen 3 architecture, Radeon Vega 8 graphics, along with 16GB of LPDDR4 running at 4266 MHz. There also is included 1TB of storage, however my unit has a 2TB NVMe drive, along with Wi-Fi 6 for networking. If this is your first time hearing about Ayaneo, you're not alone. They are a fairly new company, founded back in 2020, with the goal of bringing affordable PC gaming handhelds to the market. Their first handheld was pretty successful, raising over $2.2 million on Indiegogo. If I'm being honest, their latest handheld in the Ayaneo Next has been a bit of a disappointment on the crowdfunding side, managing only $875,000, as it had the unfortunate distinction of launching alongside the SteamDeck, splitting potential sales with Valve's first entry into the field. The Ayaneo Next certainly boasts the specs of a AAA gaming handheld, putting it well above of the SteamDeck's internals. No punches were pulled in the aesthetic design either. The PC is housed in a comfortable and well-structured plastic housing. And while I was initially worried about receiving a high contrast color scheme, after a few days with it on my desk, I have to say I have fallen in love with the orange on white motif that I have here. Out of the box, the joysticks feel buttery smooth and responsive thanks to the use of Hall effect sensors rather than potentiometers traditionally used inside joysticks. It's the same story with the triggers, which also have a nice spring weight to them, offering some fine-tuned control, especially in racing titles. Overall, the Next is very comfortable to hold for long periods of time. I had no issues at all in some 2-hour benchmark runs playing the likes of Borderlands 3, Red Dead Redemption, and so on. To say I've spent a good chunk of the last 3 weeks playing on this would be an understatement. That should give you a pretty good idea of how the rest of this review is going to go. Getting games installed was just as easy as you'd expect on a Windows PC, because that's exactly what this is. One of the first things I noticed though was the touch interface. It shouldn't be a surprise at this point, but Windows just does not offer a well thought out touchscreen experience, which is beyond strange to me even after a decade of the Microsoft Surface being a thing. Ayaneo attempts to remedy this with their own games launcher called iSpace, which also doubles as a sort of command center for adjusting various settings on the device through a handy on-screen overlay. In here, you'll find all the items that you'll likely want to adjust on the fly, like device power limits, volume, brightness, fan speed, and more. However, the game selection aspect leaves a lot to be desired. It's not that it's bad, it's just that it's not great. Navigation in ISpace can only be done through the touchscreen, and none of the familiar touchscreen navigation elements are present here. There's no scrolling through your games list like you would on a phone or a tablet. Instead, you have to grab the scroll bar and pull down. Keep in mind, this is a 7-inch screen, and the scroll bar is only around 5 pixels wide. Games from popular platforms like Steam, Good Old Games, and Epic are automatically detected and added in. However, any other applications need to be added manually, and there doesn't seem to be any option to add custom cover art, custom icons, or any other information. And that goes double for emulation. There's no easy way to add a ROM library and configure an emulator to run from the Aya launcher. Sure, you can launch Dolphin or PCSX2 directly, but then you're stuck with standard PC navigation through the touchscreen, with UI elements that are far smaller than my finger can target. On the plus side, icons and buttons inside ISpace are well sized, making hitting your mark with the touchscreen pretty easy. And the addition of the pop-out control panel for adjusting fan speed and power profiles is definitely appreciated. I think Aya is definitely going in the right direction here, but it does need quite a bit of polish before it can compete with launchers like Steam's Big Picture, or better yet, SteamOS. Unfortunately, for applications other than gaming, there's no way to use the controls on this device to navigate Windows. Thumbsticks, directional pad, buttons, and triggers are all pretty much useless for simply navigating Windows in order to install or launch your games. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here. I've spent the first 5 minutes talking about navigating the device and launching games. But what about the process of installing games? I know it sounds like it should be pretty simple. Power on the Ayaneo next, install Steam or Good Old Games or Epic, install your games, and hit play. And I guess that is all it took. The problem was how long it took. I'm not sure whose fault this is in particular, but even running over Wi-Fi 6, I wasn't able to reach speeds greater than 100 megabit per second. That's around 12 megabytes per second for those playing the home game. I don't know if you've kept up with game install requirements for the last couple years, but 100 gigabyte is not unheard of or even uncommon anymore. Installing my list of benchmark titles was easily an overnight affair, so don't expect to pull this out of the box and start playing within the first hour. And that's hoping Windows doesn't have additional updates for you as well. Now keep in mind, this is still a late-stage prototype of the final device, so I'm not shocked there are a few performance bugs to work out. But compared to the 400 megabit per second download speeds I was seeing on my SteamDeck, let's just say I'm happy I had a USB-C gigabit LAN adapter handy. Here in 2022, most games ship with standard gamepad support, which makes input pretty much plug and play. X-input support in most games has to be the only good thing to come out of Games for Windows Live. However, older titles, or games that don't offer controller or touchscreen support, may be more difficult to play properly, if at all. While the inputs from controllers are seen in pretty much every single title, mapping everything that you need is not a guarantee. That's especially true of games that require specific keyboard or mouse inputs. The Final Fantasy IV Pixel Remaster wouldn't let me see the on-screen keyboard even with it configured to a hotkey. Skyrim refused input from the keyboard altogether, so accessing the console when you need to revive a companion who died from being pushed off a cliff by a moose makes it feel like I'm playing in 2011 rather than 2022. Not being able to play Final Fantasy IV on my Ryzen 7 handheld is definitely not a deal breaker, but it does demonstrate a downside of being locked into using only a touchscreen or an Xbox controller on the handheld. Overall, Windows as a mobile operating system is just not a great experience, and it's something that's been proven time and time again by mobile gaming platforms like Ayaneo, GPD Win devices, and dates all the way back to Windows Vista and Sony's 5-inch UMPCs. One last thought on the interface. While Steam for Windows does offer Big Picture Mode, which is a fantastic games launcher, adding in games from other platforms like Good Old Games or Epic is often a title-by-title affair. And it's much the same story if you have a library of retro gaming ROMs. Luckily, there are some third-party options available. Launchbox is often recommended as a games launcher for Windows, and I decided to give it a try in an attempt to make the Next a little bit more of a console-like experience. Because, let's face it, who wants to fiddle with a tiny touchscreen interface and double-clicking on the wrong icon 8 times in a row before actually launching the game you wanted to play? Unfortunately, the free version of Launchbox is pretty limited for navigation options, meaning you can only use your mouse or a touchscreen to launch games. That really doesn't solve anything, as the interface is still far too small to navigate with my sausage fingers. There is a paid upgrade for Launchbox called Big Box. Now, unfortunately, it did set me back $70 and an evening spent fine-tuning and tweaking all of the settings. Game launcher catalogs like Steam and Good Old Games are automatically added and kept in sync as games are installed. Getting emulators up and running is equally simple. Just tell Big Box where the emulator for a particular system is and where the ROM library is stored, and it will import everything else for you, including box art and manuals. As good as Big Box is, keep in mind that it is still a third-party $70 quality of life improvement that I do recommend for a handheld Windows gaming system. That being said, I would love to see Ayaneo continue to improve their own launcher to include things like proper touch and controller inputs, as well as the ability to customize device profiles when launching games. Maybe allow custom controller layouts or power profiles depending on the title being launched. Final thoughts on the interface: Linux support for the Ayaneo Next is, dare I say, a must-have thing in the near future, as I have a feeling SteamOS is going to be a major player in the mobile gaming space far sooner than any of us think. All that being said, I did spend the better part of the last 3 weeks playing on this thing, and while Rhett has been transcribing my notes on this device, I've been playing Super Mario 64 PC port and I'm up to 60 stars before even getting to the second floor of Peach's Castle. If it wasn't obvious from the amount of time I've spent playing games on the Next in the guise of testing, the ergonomics on this device are almost perfect in my opinion. Button and stick placement on the face are well spaced out, and I didn't find myself inadvertently hitting the right joystick when reaching for the ABXY buttons, nor do I have to stretch at all to reach the bumpers or triggers around the rear. But the real cherry on top, like for most gaming handhelds, is the battery life and power drain. From a full charge, I was easily able to play intensive games for between 2 and 3 hours in most cases, and just about any 20 to 25 watt capable USB-C charger will keep the device going indefinitely. Of course, ergonomics, size, and specs mean absolutely nothing if it can't serve its primary purpose. Does it play games? And if so, how well? Like the Nintendo Switch, GPD-Win 3, and even the Valve SteamDeck, the Ayaneo Next is running a 720p LCD with a 60Hz refresh rate. Well, more accurately, it's a resolution of 1280 by 800, but what's 80 lines among friends? This console isn't going for graphic superiority or 144Hz street cred. It's attempting to find a balance between performance, portability, and battery life, which means benchmarking isn't necessarily just how fast can it run. Like in testing the GPD-Win 3, I've set the TDP to its second highest preset. With the GPD-Win 3, that was 20 watts out of a possible 25. With the Ayaneo Next, that means a max of 15 watts instead of a 20 watt total power draw. The reasoning is all down to battery life. Running a game at 20 watts instead of 15 is going to drain your battery up to 33% faster, but not while increasing performance by the same margin. At most, I saw around a 20% improvement in performance between 15 and 20 watt presets in games. And if we're talking about a difference of 35 FPS versus 42 FPS on average, I'll take an extra 30 to 40 minutes of battery life instead of the frame times. A couple games did struggle to run at 30 FPS consistently, so I did bump them up to 20 watts, but will provide both frame rate averages. Along those same lines, almost every single game was ran at low settings, with the occasional bump to add in FXAA or extended draw distance. Again, portable gaming is always about compromise, even on purpose-built consoles like this. While you are welcome to run the Ayaneo Next on a USB-C dock and let the system run at full power if that's how you want to spend your money. But I think most gamers will be using this as a handheld gaming device more often than not, so that's how I'm testing it. With all that out of the way, let's dive into performance. BeamNG.drive is called a racing and liquid model physics simulator by its creators, but you know as well as I do, you'll spend 95% of your time causing wanton destruction to your car and anything around it. The Next manages to break glass and bend steel at 55 frames per second, making it a wonderful experience on the handheld. Joystick and throttle response felt amazing as well with the Hall effect sensors and had remarkably accurate inputs when racing. As smooth and seamless as the driving was, throwing rally cars off the top of a mountain is still the best part of this game. The game I sank the most time into testing here was Borderlands 3. Not because I needed to get more data, but because I just couldn't put it down. Even at low settings, the latest vault hunting loot shooter had me hooked, from both a gameplay and performance perspective. 15 watts was enough to average between 40 and 50 frames per second in most areas, and again, the joysticks and triggers made sniping psychos an absolute pleasure. This was by far my favorite title to play on the Ayaneo Next, and a perfect example of why a game console like this has a reason to exist. Sure, Splatoon is great on the Switch, but somehow painting the ground with slightly different methods feels like the best use of this console. And finally, we are able to play Breath of the Wild on a handheld console. Sure, the latest Zelda game only ever saw release on the Wii U and Nintendo Switch, both of which struggled to maintain even 25 frames per second on their respective platforms. The fact that this runs at all on the Ayaneo Next is downright awesome. Add in that with a couple tweaks, we're able to hit speeds upwards of 40 frames per second, along with graphic enhancements like FXAA. You've probably never seen this game look anywhere close to this good, even on a 7-inch screen. The only game that truly struggled to run on my GPD Win 3 was Cyberpunk 2077, averaging around 24 FPS with drops into the low teens. Imagine my surprise when the Ayaneo Next was able to run this title at 34 frames per second on average at just 15 watts of power draw. Bumping that up to 20 watts in performance settings got me up to 42 FPS as well, meaning not only is Cyberpunk playable, it's actually an enjoyable experience. Joystick response was slightly too touchy for my tastes in this title, making aiming difficult, but a little tuning would probably improve this pretty easily. Overall, a very impressive showing for both the Next and Cyberpunk. The newest handheld on the market should be required to run the new hotness, right? Well, I'm happy to say that Elden Ring managed 44 frames per second on average at the 15-watt TDP config. This means you should only die around 38 times before the battery runs out if you average one death every 4 minutes like I do. Gameplay was smooth and textures look fantastic even at low resolutions on this small screen. Just make sure you're playing this one on a soft surface as to not damage the Ayaneo Next too badly when you throw the console. Walking through the remains of Boston has never looked so good on a handheld. While Skyrim was able to make an appearance on the Nintendo Switch, Fallout 4 never got the same opportunity. Yet, here it is, running at 45 FPS on average at 800p, low settings, but with all the distance sliders maxed out. Sure, when everything blows up around you, there are some frame drops into the high 20s, but even in combat, the game had no problem staying in the mid 40s and looked noticeably better than it did on the GPD Win 3 last year. It truly feels disgusting to say that Grand Theft Auto V was released almost 9 years ago, but it still remains a hugely popular title today. At low settings, the Ayaneo makes short work of this title, holding a solid and consistent 60 frames per second throughout. While this isn't the most demanding game by modern standards, it's still great to see this game running at full speed on a portable console. If you're a fan of this game, the Next should provide you with 3+ hours of felony committing action on a single charge. Hitman 3 has a reputation for running well on just about any CPU-GPU combo, and the Ryzen 7 5800U is no exception. At our 15-watt TDP, we see an average of close to 50 frames per second, with reasonable dips down into the low 30s. When playing this game on a low-end PC in the past, low-resolution textures really detracted from the overall look and playability of this title. When running on the handheld though, I was actually really impressed with the level of detail still present. While I still prefer a keyboard and mouse for Hitman games, I wasn't at all disappointed when switching over to the Ayaneo controller. Analog triggers have long been a wishlist item for mobile gamers, as most portable PC makers seem to only include bumper-style buttons, meaning racing and flight sim games were kind of getting the shaft in terms of playability. Of all the mobile consoles I've used over the last 2 years, including the GPD Win 3 and the SteamDeck, the Ayaneo Next has the best feeling triggers in the business. Being able to feather the accelerator or brake when entering a corner makes racing games not only playable, but a much more immersive and enjoyable experience. It also doesn't hurt that Project Cars 3 managed to run at 50 FPS on average the entire time. Like Cyberpunk 2077, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a very demanding game, even at low settings. In most of the open world gameplay, we sat right around 32 frames per second on average, but never dipped below 25. Even in some more intense combat scenes, the game didn't skip a beat, maintaining that 30 FPS metric. With texture resolution set to low, the game definitely suffers a bit in visual quality, but on the mobile screen, it's not the end of the world. While you shouldn't expect 60 FPS in this game at any setting, you can rest a little easier knowing you'll still get better performance than on the original Xbox One release. Yet another racing game known for its ridiculous hang time and bone-crushing hits is Wreckfest. The flat-out spiritual successor pits you against up to 24 opponents in racing, demolition, or straight-up survival scenarios, and even at low settings, this game remains amazingly detailed. Metal deformation, flying debris, and particle effects, there's enough eye candy here to keep everyone entertained. Performance-wise, the Ayaneo was able to keep the frames flying at around 50 FPS on average, but this title fluctuates wildly from 35 to 60 depending on what's on screen and how many cars are still functioning. An awesome game and a great showing on the next handheld. As you can see, performance was absolutely incredible in most instances. Games like Red Dead Redemption 2 and Project Cars 3 are some of the most demanding games that you can run today. The fact that every game that I installed onto the 2TB NVMe drive was not only playable, but often averaged above 45 FPS is downright astounding. That said, the Ayaneo Next is in an interesting position here. Handheld gaming PCs have traditionally been a niche market reserved for select enthusiasts with too much cash. As configured, this model is going to run you around $1,350, or slightly more than double the price of a SteamDeck with a 256GB drive. Yes, the Ayaneo has far superior hardware, much more on par with a high-end Ultrabook rather than a mid-tier laptop. Yes, the Ayaneo has an objectively better controller, specifically looking at the Hall effect joysticks and triggers, along with some of the best-feeling D-pad and buttons I've ever had my hands on. All that said, it's not a slam dunk. While the Next has a hardware advantage over every other handheld in the market, it also suffers many of the same drawbacks. Windows. Windows makes for a terrible mobile operating system, and the lack of input options exacerbates this. A 720p 7-inch touchscreen is no replacement for a mouse or a trackpad, as navigating the operating system is still a necessary evil without simpler game install or launcher options. While there are two hotkey buttons that are fully configurable in ISpace, that doesn't mean configuring and running games is any easier. The large hotkey brings up the ISpace quick menu or the launcher, and the smaller button is a dedicated Xbox button for Windows overlays, or can bring up an on-screen keyboard. Not that the keyboard is very reliable in some titles. I received the Ayaneo Next and the SteamDeck less than 5 days apart from one another, and have had equal time on both systems. While the SteamDeck and SteamOS aren't perfect, they do improve on nearly every complaint I have about Windows in this context. While Valve may not have included hardware quite as impressive, I also forgot that I was playing on a PC most of the time, as the experience is almost seamless from an installation, configuration, and execution perspective. So where does that leave us with the Ayaneo Next? If this was released 8 months ago, its only competitors would be the GPD Win 3 and the One X Player. The Next would absolutely get my vote every single day of the week and twice on Tuesdays. But we live in a landscape that's been turned on its head by the Steam Deck. At least we do if you got your pre-order in the first 15 minutes. Is the Ayaneo more expensive than the Steam Deck? Yes. Are there major advantages to the Ayaneo Next as far as hardware specs? Yes. Does the Ayaneo Next have a better gamepad controller? Yes. Is the Ayaneo Next just as portable, just as ergonomic, and just as awesome as the Steam Deck? Yes, yes, and yes. Is it worth $1,350? I would also say yes if SteamOS 3.0 was ready to be installed on this hardware. I hate to say it, but even though the Ayaneo Next is a phenomenal bit of kit, with class-leading performance and controller inputs, it still suffers from the same pitfalls as most other devices in this market. It relies on Windows. While ISpace has some good ideas, it's just not in the same realm as SteamOS for user-friendliness, installation, management, or even overall features. If, and I cannot stress that enough, if Ayaneo can continue to improve and develop ISpace with user-friendly inputs, things like familiar touch gestures for navigation, larger buttons for accurate manipulation, full customization of applications and settings, and support for either native ROM launching or plugin support for third-party launchers, it would take nearly every complaint that I have about the user experience here and put it to bed. The problem with modern handhelds, though, is the review isn't just about the hardware anymore, which is basically flawless here. It's about the entire user experience. Ayaneo has knocked it out of the park with everything in the Next when it comes to hardware and performance. But in the end, frustrations with Windows, along with competition available at a much lower price point, might make all that effort a bit of a lost cause. Which really is a shame, because I really like what Ayaneo has done with the Next. But that being said, I hope I'm able to install SteamOS onto this hardware sooner rather than later. Once again, a huge shout out to Ayaneo for sending over the Next for my review. If you are interested in picking up this console for yourself, I will have a non-affiliated link down in the video description. Go give that a look. On your way down there, make sure to drop this video a like and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing to keep up with daily shenanigans like this. And if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in what I do, consider joining the Patreon. Link is down in the video description. And that is going to do it for me in this one, folks. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. Beer for today is from Binary Brewing out of Portland, Oregon. It is the Wheatadore 64 Wheat Ale, clocking in at 5%. I love Binary Brewing, all of their can art, all of their beer names. Just kind of a special place in my heart. So, the Wheatadore 64 Wheat Ale. I like the idea of the name because, as they say, they're going back to basics. Get it? This is just a straight up good beer. It's crisp, it's refreshing, it's got this nice rich maltiness to it that's not really overbearing. I mean, if you're someone who's coming from a Widmer Hef or a Fat Tire, Hefeweizen style ale, this might be a nice little step up for you. It's a slightly more complex brew than that, but it still has all of the proper tasting notes from what should be an American wheat ale. Definitely recommended.